then there's the right to water one as well. So maybe what we should do is actually invite the Canadian delegation to say we would like to meet them. And then we do this in, we've done this before and it's very useful in the past for different things. So maybe we should start using a lot of the letters and say, well, for specific delegations which we find are problematic, and say we would like to make an appointment to come and see you, and we go in a big group and we bring the 1,000 and the 400 signatures and say, we haven't got a reply. And then we have a meeting with the Bureau as well, but that's more, so I think we should go for the delegations. I think that's a very important point to make. I just want to quickly sort of sum up, because I think we all need to go back and watch what's happening. But I think what's quite clear, which has come up, is that because the mandate for this conference was not just about the green economy and institutions. It was about looking at gaps of implementation and the new and emerging issues. But the whole thing has been reduced to the green economy and institutional framework. And then reduced in such a way that it becomes even more simplistic. And the reason we had put this roundtable to look at the risks around the green economy is because the more comprehensive sustainable development framework, that it took us years to get governments to even accept that as an operating framework. And then we were looking in the last 20 years to really make the rights issue cut across the 3 dimensions or pillars or what have you. And we thought we were making some progress, even though there have been a lot of unfulfilled commitments. But then we get to the process and all that sort of disintegrated. And so the dominant attention on the green economy in the official process by some countries to say that this is going to be the new vision in that way. And that new vision is very economic driven. And I think that's why we wanted to have this discussion, to bring us back to say we have slipped very much down the slope away from the complexity of transition to sustainability. It's painful and it's difficult. And it's not just about economic costs, it's about human and nature's costs as well. So instead of dealing with that honestly, we find that some countries, or some representatives of some governments, want to just wipe out the last 20, 30 years and then let's say start afresh. And that's what we cannot allow them to do. I think it was very encouraging to hear from Melinda that when she reads the real principles, it's very rooted in rights. So we would say, that's why we call for reaffirmation. We say, that is the starting point. We cannot go backwards. To go backwards would be really shameful. And so that's still relevant, that's still valid, because many countries are saying the world has changed, we must reinterpret. And the precaution principle and all these principles are under attack. For example, today in the agriculture section, there's a lot of introduction by the United States of the term science-based. Now those of us who remember the fight around precaution, it's not that we don't have science, but science is limited. There's a lot of lack of knowledge and information gap. And the precaution principle is about dealing with the lack of certainty in science. But nobody has actually raised it because a lot of people may not realize in that room that when you put in science-based, you're actually saying no to precaution principle. Right? So we need to alert, because some of the people who are negotiating don't have that institutional or even the knowledge history, because they're diplomats, they're not dealing with these issues. So I would say it's important for us in the next 24 hours to pick some of these most fundamental issues and then to frame it and say, this is what you're doing, you're dismantling. Instead of moving forward, we're actually dismantling some of the most important basic principles. The issue of technology assessment, I think, is absolutely crucial. And that we find all over, and today again there was a lot of, I think there was a proposal that we must consider all types of technology and all kinds of technology without differentiation. So that is to be looked at. The human rights and the rights of Mother Earth, we've been really going on that in a big way, but we've seen a lot of rights given to corporations, intellectual property rights. And I think the debate over UNEP's approach has been because UNEP wanting to really move the limits of the planet, into action, want to make business, which has a lot of power, realize that if they look at nature as capital stock, it might make them more sensitive. I'm putting it very crudely, but that's been part of the debate in many of our conversations with some parts of UNEP. So there is a thinking within UNEP around ecosystem services and biodiversity, for example. If we give it some economic valuation, people will value it more. But that is an approach that may also lead to problems. And that's why there's been this debate over the green economy, perceived in that way. So I think that this is only the first step in our work for this week. There are very few of us here, but nevertheless, as Amin said, it's a privilege for us who can actually be here, and how do we make use of that? Just to share very quickly with you, as many of you know, the fight in UNCTAD in Doha was over how one part of the UN, which is so small, which can still do some independent research, and sometimes we don't like also what they do, but nevertheless they were under attack. So after 3 days and nights, they managed to have an agreement that this UNCTAD meeting will reaffirm what they agreed in Accra at the last meeting. Sounds very familiar. Reaffirm the Accra meeting, and to bail on and say that it's valid and relevant. It took them 3 days and nights to defend a work program of UNCTAD, all right? Because that would determine the scope of what UNCTAD would be to deal with issues of finance and trade and development, because many developed countries say that they have no right to do that. You know, that should be WTO and the World Bank and IMF and G20 or what have you. Here we're trying to fight to keep the real principles. It's going to be a much harder struggle. But at the same time, it shouldn't be that hard a struggle. If we cannot even keep that, don't talk about new visions. Seriously. So that has to be our non-negotiable red line. We hear the US and many countries say that crosses our red line. We cannot accept this word. So we have to say very clearly, this is our red line, and then we can evolve that. The whole thing about social protection today was being dismantled. Right? And yet you find that there is a lot more consensus than we realize, but 1 or 2 countries just come in and say we don't want it. So I think we need to pick that up. Decent work has already been accepted to a large extent. I think we have actually, the unions and everybody else around this issue, actually I think we are there. But what is the context of decent work? You know, what's the point in recognizing decent work all over the place, and then we do not deal with financial instabilities because we don't touch that area? And then there's no work to be decent about, you know. So I think maybe some of these fundamental things that we have to sort of come together and say, no matter where we're coming from. And certainly principle 10, participation and decision making, that is part of the real principles. So if you reject the real principles, you're also rejecting principle 10. I think I'll stop there, okay, because we need to go and watch.
Sure. So thank you, Yokelin. Thank you on behalf of all the organizers.